Welcome back to the Pursuit of Progress. As always, guys, I'm Adam, and I want to start today with a situation that I think almost everybody can relate to. So your alarm goes off at 5:30 in the morning, and the reason it's going off at 5:30 is because the night before you decided, you know what, tomorrow morning I'm getting up early, I'm going to go work out, I'm going to get my day started right. You had a plan, you were committed, and then 5:30 actually arrives, and suddenly that negotiation begins. I didn't sleep that well. I probably just need the extra rest. I'll just work out this afternoon instead. Actually, recovery is probably more important than getting up this early. Somehow, within like literally 30 seconds, you've built an incredibly convincing argument for just staying in bed. And here is the funny part. The person that you're negotiating with is you. And I think we do this way more often than we realize. I'll start eating better Monday. I'll make those calls after lunch. I'll save more money next month. I'll have that difficult conversation when the timing is better. There's always a reason. And a lot of times, it's actually a pretty convincing reason. But I think one of the biggest things standing between us and the life that we say we want isn't our ability, it's not opportunity, and a lot of the time, it's not even motivation. It's our ability to take ourselves and talk to ourselves out of doing the things that we've already decided are important. Again, it's our ability to talk ourselves out of doing the things that we've already decided are important. And that is exactly what I want to talk about today on a brand new episode of the Pursuit of Progress podcast. I'm here solo today. Ben will be back next week. And with all that being said, you guys, let's get started. How do we stop negotiating with ourselves? Well, let's just start off with this. We're really good at making excuses that sound logical. And I think this is probably what makes our excuses so dangerous. They usually don't sound like excuses. They sound completely reasonable. I'm just too busy. I need more information. It's probably not the right time. There's a laundry list of different things here. But the problem is that sometimes those things are true. And sometimes you really are too busy. Sometimes you really do need more information, or you really are waiting for somebody else to give you that smart decision. But sometimes we're taking a legitimate sounding reason and we're using it to give ourselves permission to avoid something that's probably a little uncomfortable. And we're really good at doing that. And I'm speaking out of experience, you guys, because no matter who it is, anybody out there, they're not going to know how to talk to myself or whoever it is that you're speaking to out of doing something better for themselves. As an example, I'm not going to talk myself out of doing something better for myself. I know exactly which argument is always going to work on me. I know exactly which excuse probably is going to sound the most reasonable enough to convince myself. And you know what? It's probably okay if I don't do this today. And that's something that's going to probably eventually be true because I'm telling myself what I already know and what I want to hear. And that's where I think we have to learn to ask ourselves just a better question. So is this actually a reason, or am I just looking for permission to avoid something that's uncomfortable? Because there's a big difference, you guys. Maybe you don't need more information. Maybe you're afraid to make that decision. Maybe you aren't even that busy necessarily, but maybe it's not a priority right now, but it needs to be. And I think that sometimes just being willing to recognize that can change the entire conversation, just being willing to recognize. I want to talk now also for a minute on motivation, because motivation is very unreliable. And this might be something that ruffles some feathers, but I think it's definitely something that I've learned as I got older, that motivation is great, but it's also incredibly unreliable. There are days when I wake up still feeling like I can take on the world. I'm excited, I'm focused, I'm ready to go. And be honest with you guys, probably more days where it's not like that, where I don't feel like doing much of anything. And that's normal. The problem comes when our plan for accomplishing something depends on how we feel that day. And that's the problem, because imagine if you only went to work when you felt motivated, or imagine if you only paid your bills when you felt inspired. Imagine if you only took care of your kids or your house, your clients, just your responsibilities when you were really only in that perfect mood where you felt like it was a possibility that you could actually do this stuff. Life does not work that way, unfortunately, you guys. There are certain things that we just do because we're already decided that they're important and they need to get done, not because we feel like doing them every single time. And I think that's one of the biggest differences between motivation and discipline. So think of it this way. Motivation says, I feel like doing this. Discipline says, I already decided that this matters enough to do. That's a completely different mindset, you guys. And I don't think discipline is something that some people are just magically born with either. I think it's something that we build little by little. Every time that we do something when we don't feel like doing it, that's practicing discipline. And every time we let ourselves renegotiate the decision because we're tired or uncomfortable, distracted, or we just don't feel like doing it, we're also practicing that too. So it's so important just to really build up this muscle. And I like to also think of it as this way. It's not something that's just going to last forever. Oh man, I'm drawing a blank on the word here. It's a diminishing skill. If you don't practice this on a daily or very regular basis, you're going to lose it. It's not something that's just going to always be with you. So you have to prove to yourself day in and day out and hold yourself true to the promises you make. And that is that discipline. And that is what then builds the motivation. Another way I like to kind of frame this for some people, and myself included, is how I sometimes kind of help myself, force myself into doing what needs to be done, is just by creating what we like to call non-negotiables. So how do we make it easier on ourselves? Because let's be honest, you guys, everybody out there, we all struggle with this. And the easier it is to do something, the more likely it is that we're actually going to do it. So I think one of the best things that we can do is just creating a few of these non-negotiables in our life. Not 30 of them, not 50 of them, just a few. And not just some massive list that completely changes your life starting tomorrow. I'm talking about just a few things that matter enough that you've decided that isn't up for debate anymore. Maybe you exercise 4 days a week. Maybe you make a certain number of prospecting calls every morning. It's a non-negotiable. Maybe you're trying to save money to buy your first house. Maybe it's automatically saving or investing a certain percentage of every paycheck that comes in, non-negotiable. Maybe dinner is really important to have with your family once a week, some quality time with your significant other, whatever it is, just understanding that the specific thing isn't really the point here. The point is that you've already made the decision. And because of that, thinking about how much mental energy you're not going to be wasting constantly thinking about what decisions are right or wrong. Think about just how much time you spend. That 5:30 a.m. alarm goes off. Should I work out today? I don't know. Should I? Before you know it, 30 minutes goes by and it's too late to go to the gym now because you've just been, thinking about it for 30 minutes instead of just getting up and doing it. Crazy, you guys, just how important this is, because I think when you have it as a non-negotiable and you've already decided, there's nothing left to negotiate. It's just get up and get started and just do it. Just Nike, just do it. Pretty simple, a lot easier said than done, but just so important. And now I'd like just to kind of close this out with one final point that I prepared. And this is something that I am speaking on behalf of myself because this is so, I think, critical in order to really build up the belief within yourself. And that is keeping promises to yourself. And I think there's something even bigger happening here than just the words that I'm saying here, because it isn't just about productivity. It's about trust. Every time that you tell yourself you're going to do something, you're essentially making yourself a promise. Think about what would happen if you had a friend who constantly did this. I'll meet you at 8 a.m. They don't show up. I'll call you tomorrow. They don't call. I promise I'll take care of it. They don't. How long would it take before you stop trusting that person? Probably not that long. But think about how often you do the exact same thing to yourself. Tomorrow I'm going to get up early. I'm going to go to the gym. And then you don't. Monday morning, I'm starting. You don't. This month, I'm finally going to start saving money. You don't. And I could go on and on, you guys. At some point, doesn't that affect the way that we see ourselves, our self-confidence, our self-belief? I know it does for me. And I think that confidence isn't just believing that you're talented. Confidence is trusting in your own words. And it's, again, so simple and basic, but one of the biggest catalysts, one of the biggest levers that you can pull to really build up that self-confidence is just by holding these promises to yourself. It's knowing that when you tell yourself you're going to do something, there's a pretty good chance you're actually going to do it. And every time you follow through, you're building a little bit more evidence. You're proving it to yourself. I can actually count on myself. I think that's one of the most underrated ways to build confidence. It's not an affirmation. It's not telling yourself how great you are. It's not looking at yourself in the mirror and winking at yourself. It's about actually keeping promises to yourself, even the small ones. In fact, especially the small ones, because those are the ones that start adding up. So I'm going to leave you guys with this. Make this decision and just make it once. This might be the most practical idea out of this entire episode. Stop making the same decision every single day. If you've decided that you're going to go to workout on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, don't wake up Wednesday morning and make that decision all over again. You already decided. If you decide you're automatically investing, a certain amount or percentage of money every month, don't reconsider. Don't completely change your financial plan every time that, the transfer happens at the beginning of the month. You've already decided you're going to make 10 times the amount of effort that you've said to yourself over the last 10 years that you're going to do, but you never actually did. You taking action because you already made that decision and you're just following through. And that, my friends, is the power of non-negotiables. They eliminate the daily negotiation. And I see this in real estate all the time too, to be honest with you. Somebody might come up and tell me, I really want to buy my first home this year. And, that's great. I'll say, awesome. They've thought about it. They've looked at their finances. I mean, maybe they've already decided that home ownership is a goal for 2027. But then they spend the next 6 months renegotiating the decision every time that something comes up and happens. Mortgage rates tick up by 0.25%. A scary, housing headline comes out on the news. Their friend tells them that prices are going to crash. They see somebody on social media predicting a recession. There's so many things that can just bring you back to square one. And now I'm definitely not saying they should blindly move forward with a major decision because, regardless of what happens, that's up to you guys. But that's not the point here. What I'm trying to get at is that new information should affect your decisions, but your circumstances are going to change. Sometimes changing your mind is absolutely the right move, but there's a difference between responding to new information and constantly searching for reasons not to act. And I think that's true with almost everything, you guys. Investing, starting a business, maybe changing your career, getting healthier, maybe getting rid of a bad habit, having a difficult conversation, something that maybe you wanted to do for years that you've just never had the courage and the willingness to try. There comes a point where you've done the research, you've already done it, you've already thought about it, you've already made the decision, and now it's time to execute. So with that, you guys, I hope you have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week. Don't forget, share the show with a friend. And I look forward to seeing you guys on a brand new episode of The Pursuit of Progress next week with my co-host, Ben. Until then, I'll see you guys later. Bye.